Good morning and welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist video series. I'm Kyla Watson here with Phil Long on a very cold day. How you doing, Phil?
Yep, we are heading into the winter season, it seems like. We've moved indoors, made the transition, and it looks like winter outside.
I know, it changed just like that. I can't believe it.
Yep, ice and snow and everything. So I think a lot of folks across Latham country are getting a little bit of this, and it was even a discussion on the national news. So.
Oh wow, well very good. Well, the good news with this is that I do believe a lot of farmers are finishing up, if not already done, with harvest 2020.
Yeah. This fall, despite the crazy year that we've had, has been really good. I've seen a lot of, most of the fields around here out. I know even up north they're making good headway, although starting to fight the snow and so forth. But a lot of farmers have had the opportunity to get tillage done that they maybe haven't the last few years, and even getting some lime spread, manure on, and all those things a little earlier maybe even than what they planned. So that's good. I guess we've had a somewhat dry fall so far, and we do need some moisture, so it's not all bad.
Right. Exactly. Well, today we're going to be talking about planning for 2021 and using those field notes from the 2020 season to help guide those decisions.
Yeah, everything that we just sat the last several weeks in the combine and soaked up, all that information, not only from the yield monitors, hopefully, but also from visually what we saw and kind of the culmination of the whole year. I mean, that's really what this is all about. That's why we want to discuss it now, because it's fresh in your minds, and we know that placing hybrids and varieties to each field is really where we get the most bang for our buck.
Mm-hmm. And why is it so important to place those products field by field?
Yeah, it's a proven fact. So we've got research from across not only industry, but also universities have shown that we get at least a 15 to 20% yield bump right off the top. If we're placing those products correctly, that's where 20% of the yield's coming from. So when you see a 50 bushel swing on a product, you may think, oh, that's a bad product. Mm-hmm. That's not always necessarily the case. Sometimes it's just placed wrong, and it's unfortunate that sometimes we don't see that as well, but that's really where that comes from, and that's why we want to see success with our customers. We want to make sure that those products are placed correctly so that they can see success.
Okay, very good. Well, for farmers that are starting to walk through this process for 2021, what would you say are two important questions that they need to be identifying?
Sure. To me, when I think through placing products, the first thing that comes to mind is, remember, we're doing this field by field, so the challenges specific to that field, or you could look at it as the opportunities within that field that we have to work with. These can be tough spots like wet spots or really dry spots, or maybe a pest problem out there, whether it's white mold or gray leaf spot, a history of something that you know really well in that field, something that you can plan around really well. Those are the things that I keep at the front of my mind. And then the second part of that is mixing in the management style. So this is something that most of us should know. Sometimes it's one of those things you have to have a reminder from a friend, but to remind you how you manage. Most of us kind of have an idea how we manage. In some fields it's a little different, but that's why we do it field by field. So mixing those two together really can help. With those two things, I can really place a product really well. Understanding how the farmer manages their farm, their operation, kind of the level at which they do it, and then what are the challenges to that particular field, and how can we put a product there that's going to thrive in that situation.
Okay.
So everyone is different, just like we're all different. Our products are also, we pick them specific to needs and areas and soil types and so forth.
Okay, very good. Makes sense. Well, today we have 3 different scenarios that we're going to walk through on the different type of management styles that producer might be looking at. Yeah. So let's begin with our top end manager.
Sure. So the farmer that's at the top end, this one obviously is kind of self-explanatory, but this may be a farmer that likes to experiment. They'll put a fungicide on because they've seen it proven. They've seen it, at least on their farm in their area, they've seen it work many years in a row. Maybe they do in-season applications of things, like nitrogen later season, or put down in-furrow starter or things like that. There's a lot of different things that really, I always think of the 600 bushel yield equation. There's a lot of things that go into it. So the top end manager is really the one that's trying to check off a lot of boxes and really take care of that crop. They even do in-season sampling to make sure that, tissue sampling to make sure that it's doing well. So caring well for that crop, that's the kind of farmer that's going to take care of their crop. Those are the ones that I lean towards, placing those, well, I hate to use the word racehorse, but it's a top-end product. It's a product that you know that farmer probably has good fertility, has good opportunity in that field because of what they put in that field, and they're going to support it. If there's an issue with a challenge like a disease like we talked about, they're going to likely spray a fungicide. So you don't have to pick a product necessarily that's going to be extremely tolerant to gray leaf spot if they're going to spray a fungicide already. So knowing those things ahead of time, making sure that you take that into account when you're making the decision on a product is really important. So that's the kind of the top end style. I would lean towards more of those products, but still have some of those, well, some people call them steady eddies. I call them strong agronomic products. And to me, that simply means they're strong agronomically. They'll probably come out of the ground quick. They have a lot of good tolerance to diseases, but they won't lack when it comes to yield. So, we have more defensive products that when you put them up against those top end or those strong agronomic products, they won't be the top yielder out there because they're for a specific need in a specific area. So if you have a field that's like that really struggles, it struggles every year, then you want one of those defensive products. But for that type of manager or that type of farmer, I lean towards those top end products because that they have what it takes to make it successful.
And an interesting test that we just did here at Alexander to show some of that would be our stress wheel research.
Yeah. This is something that's going to be coming out really soon. I really enjoyed the stress wheel. And the interesting thing this year to me was looking at some of the change in kernel depth and kernel size. We see 30 to 40% of that yield at the end of the season. And I've talked to multiple farmers this year that say things like, in season or side dress nitrogen, those kind of later nitrogen applications really paid this year. And that's because that's from, that increase in kernel depth, that ability of that ear to flex and make use of a late season nitrogen application or a fungicide application. It really, takes that last part of the season and any more good stuff you can give it and really puts it into yield. So, paying attention to those products, that's why we use the pictures and so forth and break ears open for the stress wheel, because it gives you a good idea of how that hybrid flexes on all three levels. And that kernel depth adds a lot more yield than most people think. So for a top end manager, paying attention to that kernel depth is important because you'll get a lot even out of just the kernels. And that's not something you see length by girth, but it really shows up at the end of the season.
Okay, well, let's jump down to our scenario number 2. And this one I would say is more of the middle of the road average producer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this isn't a bad thing. Most farmers can be in this category, and even some top end producers may have fields that they manage this way. So don't take that the wrong way. This is a management style. You may manage certain fields a little bit differently, even if you're a top-end producer. So to me, this is the focus to me on this kind of producer would be those strong agronomic products. But remember, diversify. So I talk with a lot of producers about this. Even on the soybean side, I'm kind of gearing this a little bit more towards corn, but it applies to both. So diversifying the genetics. We talked about this with SCN a few weeks ago. But it's the same when it comes to other traits in corn as well. You don't want to use the same hybrid just because it did well last year. It doesn't mean it necessarily will do well this year. There was a lot of products, unfortunately, this year that hindsight's 2020. I would have placed probably a little bit differently had I known we were going to end up really dry, at the end of the season. So we can't see that coming, but we can plan for it and produce. Put some of those steady eddy products. Put those on your farm, the farms that can handle that. And if you have a field that needs a defensive one, spread out that risk, so do multiple products. If you have a really good field that's manured or something, has high P and K levels, then put that racehorse there and put a fungicide on it. So all those things should come into play. I like to see the diversity in the mix. It's really important to have that. So this would be the producer that you make sure you have, multiple products with and, focus on those ones that can do good in all scenarios.
Okay. Sounds good. And last but not least, for our third scenario, we have those management styles that are a little bit more economically conscientious.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I fit into this category too, and it's not all about economics, but to me sometimes it's about maybe you don't know all the history of that field too. So maybe you have a field that's newly rented or something. Maybe you don't know the history on that. Those are the fields that I would stick with, the products that are strong all around. So those strong agronomic products that you know will do good in a lot of scenarios. I don't ever start in those tough fields that maybe I don't know a lot about. Maybe it's not tough, but I just don't have a lot of history on it. Don't start with a defensive, and don't start with a top-end, racehorse hybrid until you understand that field. So start with one. I throw 5245 out there a lot, but there's a lot of products we have throughout our maturities that fit into that group that can do really well given the chance. So once you understand the field, then you can kind of scale back, or maybe if you need a defensive product or something. But in this scenario, I would stick with those go anywhere products. They do really well all around, and then mix in maybe one or two of the high end or defensive type of products as well. So it really comes down to the diversity in the mix. But for those that maybe want to see a return on things before they try it, whether it's fungicide or investing in more equipment, those kind of things. Sticking with a product that's can do good all around in all scenarios is a good sure bet when it comes to that kind of management style.
Yeah, I love your description you use there. If you don't know all of the history of the field, or it's a new piece of ground that you have,
exactly,
great way to go.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah,
that's what I want to stress. To me, that's a good thing. Maybe it's a new farmer or whatever the case is, but you got to take that into account, because like I said, the challenges mixed with your management style is really what builds success for that product.
Okay, very good. Well, are there any final thoughts that you would like to add?
I've mentioned it a few times, but diversity is really important. So having multiple products on your farm is really spreading out that risk, which is extremely important. And I think this kind of like retirement planning, and kind of putting different eggs in different baskets. You want to spread out that risk so that you don't have everything in one basket. And that comes, as well as with planting, products on your farm is really important. The other thing I want to say is make sure that you don't take 2020 into account too much when you're planning for 2021. 2020 was a tough year, and there's a lot of things that we'll learn for it. And I'm looking at a lot of research, and our product managers are looking at a lot of research with our products right now. But we got to remember, this is 1 year. And you don't want to think about all the things that might have happened this year and say, okay, let's do this differently next year because of this year. It likely won't be just like 2021. So keep that in mind when you're planning 2020. So keep that in mind when planning for 2021, and don't let too much weight bear on 2020 and what happened this year.
Even looking at the last 2 years, they've been wildly different.
Yeah, exactly. we can't plan. It's tough to plan for the weather and so forth, but just remember, multiple years is a good thing, and that's why we look at that in research, because we want a product that stands the test of time.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Have a good day.